Dragonstone, as seen in both Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, is a very different place from its book counterparts, both in terms of the castle and the island itself. At first, and in the context of the main show, all of this seemed very minor and would not have much of an impact. But when you factor in some of the key plot points House of the Dragon Season 2 will need to cover, namely the Dragonseed storyline, and even further down the line, some of Aegon's story, the way Dragonstone has been portrayed thus far on screen does not allow for these key events to play out in the same way they do in the book, without changes to the story being made, or some retconning of Dragonstone. Let's start by briefly talking about the actual castle on Dragonstone. In the book, the castle is described as a very grim place, built by Valyrians with arcane arts, fire and sorcery. They were capable of liquefying and reshaping stone with dragon flame. So the Dragon Lords used this magic to shape Dragonstone to look like multiple dragons. From this description alone, this is no normal castle. It's made with magic and dragon fire, giving it a very unique Valyrian look among the castles of Westeros. The key element of Dragonstone that sticks in my mind is really highlighted in the prologue of A Clash of Kings, and is the fact that the actual dragon architecture can be found throughout the castle itself, as well as the actual shape of the castle, such as small dragons framing gates and dragon claws holding torches. Even the doors are set in the mouths of stone dragons. From this description alone, you can see how very different the castle is in the show. When you compare the two, I feel the Dragonstone in the book is very much a fantasy castle, built with Valyrian magic, whereas near every other castle we see in Westeros, bar a few exceptions, tend to be classic medieval castles. When it came for Game of Thrones to adapt Dragonstone, it seemed they leaned more towards this medieval style than fantasy. In a way, I do understand this choice, as the show always tended to minimise the magical elements of the world for a more grounded approach. Thus, a more realistic version of Dragonstone that matches the visual style they were trying to create for the show's purpose, it doesn't really matter that much. Plus, I can imagine in terms of the CGI, creating the castle with such detail, covered in thousands of dragon statues, would have been a challenge and eaten a lot of the budget during those early seasons. But for me, the biggest thing that is different from the book to the show is the feel of the castle. In the books, it feels to me like it's this huge, intimidating remnant of Valyria. You can kind of get the idea of what Valyria would have been like before the Doom, with this small bit here in Westeros. Where in the show, don't get me wrong, the castle seems very impressive and hard to attack, but I just don't get the same vibes. But the thing is, for the purpose of this video, the look and feel of Dragonstone are very minor and in truth don't matter that much. What does matter, however, is how they portray and establish Dragonstone in the show, and how these differences from the book could have an impact on Season 2, however minor. Now, if you've just watched the show or don't remember these details from the book, then there is an impression you get that Dragonstone is nothing but a castle or an empty island. But there is a lot more to the island itself than just the castle. There are small folk who live on the island. While not many, they form a small community. In the book, we know there is at least a fishing village in view of the castle, with a fairly sizable population, enough to make fishing a viable trade, as well as farm the land on Dragonstone itself, with farmers who work it. It also appears there is more than one village on the island. However, the one directly in view of the castle is most likely the main centre. For example, Fire and Blood states the following: for half a year, Aegon II recovered from his wounds after the Battle of Rook's Rest in a remote fishing village, whilst Rhaenyra and much of her court were in King's Landing. It is implied that this is a smaller separate village to the one in view of the castle. We also note that this nearby fishing village is big enough to act as a port, with it also having an inn and a whorehouse. While this fishing village below the main castle never reaches the size of places such as Spicetown and Hull on Driftmark, we know it's big enough, at least by the time of the main books, to be able to host Stannis' fleet of ships in A Clash of Kings. All of this comes back to the fact not only are these features missing from Dragonstone in the show, the whole island itself appears much smaller. For example, in the book, the island is big enough for Aegon II to successfully hide for months, recover from his injuries, hide his dragon Sunfire, then spend some time training with Sunfire to get him used to flying and fighting again. So to do that without being noticed by anyone speaks to the size of the island. The main impact this very different portrayal of Dragonstone could have on the main show comes mostly down to the Dragonseed storyline. The whole reason the Dragonseeds even exist in the first place is the fact that they are so common they've been named the Dragonseeds in the first place. And it comes down to the idea that Dragonstone isn't just the castle, but a thriving population and village, which these dragon seeds are a part of, and in a way are part of the cause of their existence. The men of House Targaryen have frequently fathered bastards on the small folk who live in their shadow. We know for sure that at least 2 of the dragon seeds who claim dragons were born on Dragonstone, and then we have Adam and Alan, who were born on Driftmark, while Nettles is a little bit more vague in my opinion. Now my point is, with Dragonstone in its current form, the way the dragon seeds are handled is probably going to be done differently. While I like the idea of the fishing village and Dragonstone having a population, the show could simply have the dragon seeds come from Driftmark or King's Landing, or maybe have them come from different places across Westeros. However, what I simply think they will do is have the dragon seeds be people who live and work in the castle. It would make sense and have little impact on the story if the dragon seeds were fathered inside the castle rather than in the villages. In a way, it makes more sense than being born on women who are directly in contact with Targaryens every day inside the castle. However, I will say this, House of the Dragon has made a good start at adding depth to Dragonstone that we didn't see in the main show. There definitely seems to be a lot more people, so they could be setting up the idea already that the island is more populated than just the castle. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. I know this is a very minor issue, but it's these kind of changes that fascinate me as a viewer and a book reader. It reminds me of what George R. R. Martin's Butterfly Effect comments in regards to the show making changes to the books and the impact that has on the ending compared to the book. The Dragonstone we have in both shows is a result of creative decisions way back in season 2 of Game of Thrones, when the show was still growing its following. They could never have envisioned a spin-off 10 years later at this point, and needing some of the elements they cut to tell its story effectively. While this is a small topic, I find it interesting to speculate about